I gave up my chance to enlist in the military last life, all for Nolan. But he gave my spot to his sweetheart Linda. I took care of his household, while he was infatuated with Linda, and became more dismissive of me. Repeatedly asked for a divorce in letters. Later, Nolan got injured and returned from service. I stayed by his side, helped him recover and climb out of that dark phase. But even after he found success, he couldn't forget Linda. Even our son, whom I painstakingly raised during my pregnancy, thought I wasn't good enough for his refined businessman father, and forced me to leave with nothing. This time around, I'm letting Nolan chase after true love. I'm going to make a fortune, and push my gruff hubby to go to military school, and become a commander. Director, I've decided not to enlist. I'm going to stay in our neighborhood textile factory, and work as a laborer. The street director looked at me in surprise. Are you sure? This is the last spot for enlistment. It's in the same unit as your partner. Wouldn't it be nice to be by his side? I glanced at the red slogans painted on the wall outside the window. One enlists, the whole family is honored. Protecting the homeland without regrets. Offering youth to the green military camp. That's when I confirmed that I'd been reborn back to the military enlistment period in the fall of 1975. I smiled and said firmly, Director, women can hold up half the sky now. The textile industry is a key part of our national economy. I'm still young and can't indulge in love. I need to dedicate myself to socialist construction. In my previous life, my whole world revolved around Nolan. But in the end, I was left with nothing and died full of resentment. This time I refused to marry Nolan. The director was moved by my resolute words, patted me on the shoulder excitedly, and said, Good girl. The torch has been passed to your generation. I believe someone as exceptional as you will be a role model for women workers. After thanking the director, I left the office. Walking down the alley, I saw people wearing blue worker uniforms, riding their bicycles. At that moment, the reality of my rebirth made me look up and smile at the sunset. It's all still possible. This time, I'm going to live for myself and make my life extraordinary. When I get home, the aroma of stewed chicken hits me and feels like it awakens my soul. Following the memories of my past life, I look up and see Nolan on the couch, looking 40 years younger. Just like I remembered. Young Nolan had deep features, a strong profile, and gave off a cold demeanor. Just meeting his gaze would make my heart flutter and cheeks blush. But he never loved me. He was the youngest regiment commander in the Southern Military District, with a promising future. I was just an ordinary textile worker. If my grandfather hadn't saved his grandfather, we would never have been engaged. Nolan frowned and handed me a piece of paper. Carrie, I got the marriage report we submitted back from the commissar. Before he could say more, his mom interrupted in a stern tone. Let's hold off on the wedding. Nolan's career is on the rise and young people shouldn't be caught up in love, but should consolidate national defense while they still have the energy. My dad furrowed his brow. You're not wrong. But Carrie also plans to enlist. Wouldn't it be great for them to be together in the military after getting married? He defended me with concern in his eyes. The military is hardly a place of leisure. She'll only distract Nolan. Is your family trying to make Carrie the obstacle in Nolan's path? Nolan's mom looked at me like I was worth less than dirt. Nolan came from a long line of military men, naturally wealthy in heritage. His parents never liked me, and were always against this engagement, but couldn't break it off due to moral obligations. The marriage report was made under pressure from Nolan's grandpa. Whereas on my side, my parents were always trying to appease Nolan, putting his preferences first, and acting overly cautious and ingratiating, afraid to displease him. Such an unequal marriage wasn't worth it. Nolan looked at me and was about to speak. But I cut in. I think Mom has a point. Marriage is a big deal and shouldn't be rushed. Nolan was taken aback, eyes full of confusion. His lips parted, wanting to speak but unsure, his brows furrowed deeply. In my previous life, when Nolan put the report in front of me, I cried and begged. He reluctantly agreed that if I stayed home, took care of the house, and his parents, he could persuade them. I agreed, willingly gave up enlisting, but he gave that last spot to his beloved Linda. After marrying, Nolan's unit relocated to the south, and he refused to let me join, leaving me in the north. I wasn't resentful and managed things at home happily. But to Nolan, my hard-working nature was seen as crude, my openness as vulgar. He was obsessed with Linda from the art troupe and wrote numerous letters asking for a divorce. Eventually, Nolan got injured saving Linda from a landmine, leaving his future uncertain. Proud as he was, he refused to take a desk job and returned home when Linda decided to marry the commander's son. In the sudden fall from grace, Nolan was desolate. I, without bitterness, stayed by his side, learned acupuncture, and helped him recover. In the late 80s, riding on the wave of reform and opening up, Nolan switched to business and became highly successful. I thought I'd finally made it through the storm, until I found myself alone at the hospital taking care of my seriously ill mother-in-law. I stumbled upon Nolan carefully accompanying Linda for her prenatal checkup. There was a tenderness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. That's when it hit me. Nolan had always been hung up on his first love from when he was young. He didn't remember my years of dedication and hard work. He forgot that when he got hurt, I cared for him without a second thought. Everything I gave and did for Nolan was seen as nothing but a burden. His heart seemed wrapped in ice, impossible for me to thaw, no matter how hard I tried. In the daily neglect from Nolan, I slowly turned into someone contemptible. The son I carried for 10 months and raised with so much care started looking down on me, thinking I was unfit for his graceful businessman father. Mom, you really should look in the mirror and see how you match up to Dad. Dad and Linda are the perfect couple made for each other. If you hadn't been clinging to Dad forever with the excuse of the past, he and Linda would have been together ages ago, he'd say. Even at his wedding, his own mother, wasn't invited. Instead, Linda, the other woman, sat at the parents' table. His betrayal was the last straw for me. I did everything I could to protect and provide for him, but it all ended up with his selfishness and coldness cutting me to pieces. I was filled with resentment and regret. I had wasted my life on Nolan, but this time, I was going to step away and live for myself. Nolan rushed me into our room, clearly impatient, to explain himself. Carrie, my family just thinks we're too young to rush into marriage. The district is a bit hectic lately. Once things settle down, I promise I'll submit the marriage application. Also, being stationed together in the same army unit isn't ideal. You should rethink enlisting, he said. I just smiled calmly. No need to think about it. Nolan, I never planned on enlisting to be your comrade. My words caught Nolan off guard. He couldn't believe I'd let go of such a hard-won opportunity that easily. So he mocked me. Carrie, when did you learn the art of playing hard to get? The military isn't a place for romance. Nolan had a way with his words, but his actions were a different story. In my last life, he used our engagement to force me to give up my enlistment spot to Linda. And here we are again, excuses rolling off his tongue for why I shouldn't join the unit. All because he wants me to give that spot to his first love. I was ready to tell him I wanted to break off our engagement when someone started pounding on the door. Nolan's mother's voice filtered through, reminding him they needed to go, and that he promised to help Linda fix her radio. Forgetting the half-finished conversation, Nolan just told me he'd be back after he helped her and left without a thought. Watching his retreating figure, I knew he wouldn't return that night. My parents had pulled out all the stops to host him, even slaughtering the chicken meant for New Year celebrations. My father was up early to sweep the yard and scrub the stones until they sparkled. My mother worked tirelessly, wiping the table clean and laying their best cloth on it. The glass was polished with old newspapers, and the portrait of our nation's leader was dusted with care. And even all that wasn't enough to keep Nolan for a meal. As long as Linda was around, he would forget all about me. Linda, Nolan's high school classmate, was beautiful and talented, the love of his life. Her dreams of joining the army hadn't been fulfilled due to some historical familial issues. Recently those issues were resolved, but I'd already been given the last spot by the district. For Linda, Nolan would go to incredible lengths. What was pressuring his fiancée to give up an enlistment spot compared to that? Last time, Nolan even agreed to marry me, wasting my whole life for that spot. But this time, I'll hand the spot over to Linda, because I want no ties with Nolan anymore. I'd like to see if my sacrifice can bring them a lifetime together. But in the end, I didn't say anything. Luckily, in 5 days Nolan's leave would be up. Linda would join the art troupe in the military unit. Their unit would soon relocate to the south. After that, our ties would be truly severed. After dinner, not wanting to see the stress on my parents' faces, I took a walk along the peaceful river to calm down. Before long, I reached the vicinity near Nolan's military station. Memories of when my heart was full of Nolan flooded my mind. The station wasn't far from home, but Nolan always seemed too occupied serving his country to come home. Or maybe he was avoiding seeing me. Once he enlisted, he rarely came home on his own. Whenever he was on leave, I'd start planning way ahead. I'd dress in my best clothes and braid my hair into 2 sleek black plaits. I'd always carry a bag with homemade snacks and my own roasted seeds. Whenever I saw him, I was a mix of excitement and nerves, blind to the disdain in his eyes. Thinking back on it now leaves me hollow and disappointed. Raising my eyes, I accidentally saw Nolan walking arm in arm with a woman not far away. She was walking gracefully, with a floral dress perfectly outlining her curves, her long dark hair cascading smoothly over her shoulders. Their hands were tightly intertwined, and their eyes were filled with tenderness. It was Linda, the woman who'd meddled in my marriage and muddled my life in the past. Opportunity knocked. I tried to keep my cool as I quickly stepped forward and stood in front of Nolan and Linda. "Nolan, fixing radios by the riverside, are we?" Nolan's face turned ghostly pale. His hand flew away from Linda's like he'd been shocked. With a slight frown he looked at me. "Carrie, didn't I tell you to wait for me at home? What are you doing here? Are you following me?" I chuckled sarcastically. "Did you pave this road yourself? If I hadn't just happened to pass by on a walk, I would have no idea why you suddenly backed out of submitting our marriage report." Nolan looked startled, his eyes evading mine. "Carrie, it's a misunderstanding. The wedding is on hold for reasons that have nothing to do with Linda." Linda gently grabbed Nolan's arm, putting on an innocent, fragile act. Her voice so sweet it could drip honey. "Nolan, don't argue with Carrie because of me. I can't bear to see you unhappy." I was so angry I laughed, sneering coldly. "Wow, what a performance. Don't you know he's engaged? Playing the pitiful damsel here, really? Have you no shame?" Linda's eyes immediately reddened, and she looked at Nolan with a hurt expression. "Nolan, did I get it wrong? I only see you as a good friend." She did the same in the past lifetime, always acting coy with Nolan, somehow always managing to drive a wedge between us. Nolan quickly shielded Linda behind him, looking at me disapprovingly. "Carrie, show some respect. Linda and I are just friends." I widened my eyes on purpose, raising my voice. "Just friends? Holding hands? Nolan, do you think I'm that naive? I'm your fiancé. Do you even remember what we've been through?" With Nolan, I'd always been the one to just go along quietly. Being assertive like this took him by surprise. He couldn't even respond. A few ladies nearby, eavesdropping, exchanged loaded glances, then started whispering among themselves. Even though I couldn't make out the words, their animated expressions made it clear. They were already spinning tales about us that would make for juicy gossip in just a couple of days. Linda probably didn't want it getting out that she was the third wheel in a military engagement. It wouldn't be a good look. She leaned closer to Nolan, softly explaining, "Nolan and I have been close since school days. I do depend on him a bit. I'm sorry it caused you to misunderstand our relationship." I snorted. "Misunderstand? You two look cozy enough for anyone to figure out what's up. I'd have respected you more if you'd at least been honest about it. What is this? Playing the victim and putting on a facade?" Linda started crying, her voice trembling. "Carrie, there's nothing between Nolan and me. How could you accuse me like that?" To Nolan, she was the innocent one like always. But behind closed doors, she'd constantly taunt me. "You've got nothing, nobody," she would sneer. "Why would Nolan choose you?" Trailing after him like a shadow to his post, "It's pathetic. You're poor and trying to use old debts to force Nolan into marriage. It's pathetic." Back then, I was timid, clueless about standing up for myself. Not anymore. Nolan flared up. "Carrie, remember how you talk in public. I withdrew the marriage report because of things happening in the unit. It has nothing to do with Linda. And it's definitely not what you're cooking up in your head. Carrie, you're getting more out of line. Apologize to Linda right now. Linda, covering her tears, had a satisfied look in her eyes. Every time I clashed with Linda in the past, Nolan made me apologize. Even if I said she provoked me first, he never believed it. Never believed his kind, graceful sweetheart would say such nasty things. Linda once again played the peacemaker, stopping Nolan. Nolan, it's all my fault. Don't be upset with Carrie. I pushed past Nolan, pointing at Linda. Shut up. Stop pretending to be the victim. You ruin relationships and act innocent? Disgusting. Never before had I defied Nolan so obviously. He was furious. Carrie, if you won't apologize, then get lost. I won't marry someone so rude and disrespectful. I laughed sardonically. Relax, Nolan. You won't have to see me again after this. Nolan froze, looking alarmed. What do you mean? I mean, as you wish. We were just childhood promise, no official papers. The engagement is off. I won't live in denial anymore. You don't owe me anything. I don't need you to marry me out of obligation. You and Linda can be together. I'm stepping aside. From now on, we're done. We're nothing to each other. You go your way, I'll go mine. With that, I turned and walked away without looking back. Last time, I'd watched Nolan walk away far too many times. This time, I got to leave first. 2 nights later, half asleep, I heard a tapping on my window. I knew who it was. It wasn't the first time. Not wanting to wake the neighbors and get caught in their gossip, I opened the window. Nolan climbed in like he belonged. His eyes locked onto mine, deep and searching, like they held 1,000 unspoken words swirling inside. That look again. Last time, it was these looks like he had fiery feelings and endless attachment that kept pulling me back. I pinched my thigh hard under the covers, reminding myself to stay alert. What are you doing here? I asked coolly. Nolan grabbed my wrist, lowered his voice, and leaned in to ask me. I heard from the neighborhood leader. You gave up joining the army? I nodded. My heart's not in it. I don't want to be a burden to the group. I thought Nolan would be happy about it, since he was waiting for me to give up my spot for Linda. But instead his face turned dark. Carrie, what do you mean? First, you give up the army, and now you're calling off the engagement. You need to stop playing around. I smirked. Isn't this what you want? Give the spot to Linda. Make room for her as your wife. And you two can be the golden couple in the army. Nolan didn't expect me to lay it all out there. He awkwardly touched his nose. What are you talking about? I promised my grandpa I'd marry you when this army stuff settles. I want you pregnant before I leave, so the wife spot is yours. No need for games to get my attention. There's already gossip outside, and Linda's upset. I don't want these rumors affecting her. I gave a bitter smile, looking down to hide my tearful eyes. Even though I felt defeated, there was still a part of me that hurt. So, he came to me not out of affection, but to protect Linda from gossip. Nolan, if you don't love me, why marry me? I finally asked the question that's haunted me in my last life. He paused, briefly confused. Annoyed, he frowned a little. Love doesn't matter. Our marriage was arranged long ago by our families and matchmaker. I don't have a say. I stayed quiet for a moment before speaking. Nolan, chasing you is exhausting. I can't do it anymore. I used to think we'd be together forever, but it's all been one-sided. Nolan didn't say a word, just pursed his lips. I took a deep breath. Go, don't come looking for me again. Let's just live our lives. The atmosphere froze for a second. I heard Nolan scoff. Fine, let's end it here. Hope you don't regret it. Then he left the same way he came, closing the window with a thud. Nolan's departure didn't stir any emotion in me. I turned off the lamp, trying to sleep again. Without the marriage, Nolan and I were just like parallel lines, never meant to cross. I wouldn't fool myself thinking he'd miss me. Even if he felt something, it was just physical. In my last life, I never got into his heart. And in this life, it would be the same. Without me clinging to him, we won't have any ties. From now on, I'll make the most of my rebirth and work hard. A great era of reform and opening is about to arrive. This time around, I won't foolishly get caught up in love again. I'm going to strive for myself. Once Nolan's leave was over, he returned to the army. Meanwhile, I was at the factory every day before dawn, weaving through rows of towering spinning machines, watching them closely. I couldn't afford to slack off, and often used my break times to learn from seasoned workers. People in the neighborhood and co-workers secretly said I was foolish. What's wrong with her? Giving up being an officer's wife to be a factory worker? They were frustrated. Even if she gets really good, she'll just be a high-skilled worker. It's not as glorious as being a captain's wife. But they hadn't been reborn, so they couldn't see the big picture. After 1984, the state would reduce directive planning products. In the late 80s, our country would become the world's top textile nation, and non-state economies would thrive. Though clothing used to be simple, with limited choices in color and style, future demand would go beyond basic wear, seeking individuality, fashion, and functionality. I planned to work at the factory for a few years to master my skills. I wanted to catch the vibrant, fast-developing wave in our country's future. With my rebirth advantage, I was determined to start my entrepreneurial dream. One morning, on my way to work along the moat, the silence was suddenly broken by grunting sounds. I looked around and saw a big black pig had jumped off a military supply pickup truck. It scattered, heading straight for me. I turned around and started running, scared. The pig chased after me relentlessly, with a service member hopping off the truck after it. It turned into a chaotic scene with me running from the pig, and the guy chasing the pig. As I dashed along the river, I lost my footing and fell into the water with a splash. The cold water seeped through my clothes, and I struggled in the river feeling helpless and sad. Had I really come back only to die again because of a pig? My ears, nose, and mouth filled with dirty water. Tears welled up but blurred into the river. Was this fate playing tricks on me? My hands thrashed in the water, grabbing only slimy plants. Then, the service member who was chasing the pig saw me fall. Without hesitation, he dived in. In a few strokes, he reached me, strong arms wrapping around my waist, leading me to the shore. Soaking wet, I looked a mess with my clothes clinging to me, outlining my curves. The soldier, now drenched too, quickly wrung out his uniform jacket and handed it to me, signaling me to cover up. He blushed, scratched his head and looked away embarrassed. Sorry, comrade, this pig's not very bright. Didn't mean to scare you. I froze, seeing his face. A mix of emotions surged within me. 40 years ago, in a past life, I crossed paths with him, if only just once. That time after Nolan and I got married, he started looking down on me more and more. He sent me a letter wanting a divorce. Feeling lost, I packed a small bag and took 3 transfers, spending 2 days and nights traveling 2,000 kilometers to the southern military camp. When I arrived, Nolan refused to see me and only sent a note through someone. The note said, "Life is really twisted, our ideas don't align, and it's not good for either of us to continue. It's better to part ways and find peace." Unable to see Nolan and feeling cold and hungry, I collapsed near a field not far from the camp. A simple and honest-looking orderly happened to pass by and gave me a couple of buns. He also found me a hostel that didn't require any introduction letter. Later, I found out through various channels that he was a cook in Nolan's unit, named Ken. Smart and diligent, he came from a poor family and joined the army after high school. 2 encounters in this life and the previous one. How can that not be fate? I thought maybe it was destiny that I met Ken again, and felt an inexplicable attachment to him. I bit my frozen, pale lips on purpose and said, "You don't even take good care of your pigs. You can't just let today's incident slide." Ken scratched his head, looking embarrassed. "It's my fault. I'll definitely teach that pig a lesson. I'm sorry for what you went through. And you saw my body. How are we going to settle this?" Ken lowered his head, nervously fiddling with his clothes, speaking in a voice as soft as a mosquito. "I didn't mean to. How do you want to handle this?" "I'll do whatever you say. As a young girl, I should be reserved. If this gets out, relatives will say I'm improper. How will I face anyone?" I bit my lip gently, trying to suppress the smile threatening to break out. Ken was an honest person, and hearing this made him too shy to look at me. "Don't listen to gossip. I'll take responsibility for you. Coming back, I plan to focus on work, not love. But when fate comes, you can't stop it." When our eyes met, a subtle feeling quietly grew. After just a few brief meetings during visiting leave, I decided to spend my life with Ken. Resources were limited, But he always saved up his meal tickets to get me a full plate of rice and several dishes. If there was meat, he wouldn't hesitate to give it all to me, keeping only the veggies for himself. Carrie, eat more. You look so skinny. His eyes were full of concern. I never saw that emotion in Nolan's eyes. Ken's family wasn't well off, with his parents working hard just to make ends meet. But with his perseverance and effort, he always stood out in the Army's various selections. This time we met and walked a small path together. Ken seemed hesitant. Carrie, our division is moving south soon. Meeting will be too hard then. So I thought. Hearing this, I was stunned, thinking Ken wanted to tell me not to see each other anymore. I didn't expect him to take a breath and sincerely say, "Why don't we get married? You could follow the Army to the south, and we wouldn't have to endure a long-distance relationship anymore." I finally got what I wanted and nodded hard, relieved. Ken was thrilled, and immediately went back to file a report for marriage in his unit. The gossip about me and Ken couldn't be hidden for long. When I told my parents I was marrying Ken, the cook, it was like a bomb hit our family and neighbors. Are you insane? Ignoring a good major to marry that guy who slaughters pigs? Mom's eyes widened with disbelief and anger. Mom, Ken's also in the military. No matter how good the major is, Nolan doesn't love or respect me or you and Dad. Ken may be a cook now, but with his skills and talent, he'll achieve great things later on. And he genuinely cares for me, and I feel secure with him. What do you know about security? He spends all day dealing with pigs and cooking. What future does he have? Can he compare to Nolan? You're ruining your life. Dad was so angry he paced the room, his pipe tapping the floor loudly. Soon, everybody knew I was bent on a spontaneous marriage. People whispered everywhere. An aunt sat on a small stool at the door, picking vegetables as she gossiped with the neighbors. That girl lost her mind, didn't she? So many girls want to marry a major, yet she just breaks off the engagement and runs off to marry a pig slaughterer. Yeah, who knows what potion she drank? How will she live in the future? One neighbor agreed, shaking her head. Someone who didn't get along with my family leaned in, mysteriously saying, "You don't know. Carrie isn't proper. They say someone's already seen her body. The major won't take her now. She has to grab someone to marry." My parents were furious, rushing out to have a big argument with them, threatening to shut them up. Trying to change my mind, they locked me in my room. Outside, Mom coaxed me, "Carrie, listen to me, break it off with that pig slayer. Let's talk to Nolan's family again, it's not too late." Nolan heard about my breakup news and the wedding plan with Ken. Furious and indignant, he took a personal leave and came to see me, bringing along a guard to mock me. He sneered sarcastically, "Heard you're marrying Ken? What a surprise. I thought you called off our engagement to marry a supreme commander. I'm a major. What does that cook slaughtering pig know? Is it because of the oil and smoke smell he carries that you lost your mind?" With increased volume and a condescending gaze, he scornfully provoked. "Such unique taste you have, giving up being Mrs. Major for a greasy cook's life." I heard Nolan's sarcastic jab, but I stayed calm, raising my head slightly, answering back sharply. "Commander, you're used to being above everyone else, thinking power can buy everything. But I'm not someone who sucks up. What Ken gave me, you'll never understand or have the right to comment on. You'll have your time to cry later." Nolan was furious, threw out a harsh comment and stormed off. I've spent my life with Nolan, so I know him well. He was acting all aggressive today not because he really cared about me, but because his pride was hurt. Not long after Nolan left, Ken showed up. He was in a crisp military uniform, carrying carefully chosen pastries and fresh pork from the market. Feeling anxious, he knocked on my door. Seeing my parents' indifferent faces, his throat tightened with nerves, but he still mustered up the courage. "Uncle, Auntie, I know you have concerns about me and Carrie. I made a mistake not visiting before, but I'm sincere about wanting to marry Carrie. My rank might not be high, but my salary is enough for us. I'll give everything I have to Carrie. I know I can't match up to a commander, but my heart is true, and I can give Carrie a solid life. Please believe in me, give me a chance." Ken's eyes were full of sincerity and resolve. My parents' cold attitudes were slowly thawing. They didn't say anything, but I knew they consented. Before long, the military approved our marriage application. There wasn't a grand ceremony, no fancy clothes. We just got married in a small military chapel, with our comrades putting up simple red wedding decorations. Ken wore his neat military uniform, and I wore a plain red dress. We stood side by side before our comrades, filled with hope and determination for our new life when we looked in each other's eyes. And that's how we stepped into marriage, supporting each other in the tides of time, holding on to our love and beliefs. Not long after the wedding, Ken's unit was relocated to the south. I moved to City A with him, but I didn't choose to live like other military wives, taking care of the household and raising kids. I had my own dreams. In a previous life, I'd been to City A few times when it had already become a top-tier domestic city, famous internationally. But over 40 years ago, it was just a small fishing village. Ken felt I deserved more, but I didn't mind, because I knew that moving into the 80s, this place would be a pioneer in economic development. In the future, it would become the most vibrant place in the country. I had a rough plan for what to do in City A. Naturally, I'd continue in my old field, the textile industry. I was known as a tough wife around the military family compound. As for our future, I've talked with Ken. Just like I expected, he's not content to stay in the mess hall all his life. Ken, do you plan to stay in the kitchen forever? You're talented. You should go to military school and explore bigger horizons. At first, Ken was a bit embarrassed. Carrie, I'm doing okay in the mess hall, and getting into military school isn't that easy. It's not easy, but if you don't try, how will you know you can't do it? People with ambition always strive to improve. You don't want to smell oil and smoke all your life, right? With my constant encouragement, Ken hit the books and studied hard again. Finally, all his efforts paid off, and he got accepted into military school. During Ken's time in school, we had our daughter. Suddenly, all the family and kids' responsibilities fell on my shoulders. But this time, a good love fills you with strength and determination. I didn't feel the hardship or the fatigue. The 80s were full of opportunities and challenges. I didn't dare slack off for a second. In our one-bedroom apartment, I comforted our young child while planning my business in my mind. I only had an old sewing machine, a treasure I found in a second-hand market, which became the tool for my dream to take flight. During the day, I carried the child around, hunting for cheap fabric suppliers. At night, I was working non-stop at the sewing machine, cutting and stitching. I studied fashion magazines from elsewhere, thinking of how to blend the trendy elements into my textile designs. Whenever I hit a technical snag, I sought advice from old tailors. At first, I could only sell my handmade textiles within the compound or at small street stalls, and sales weren't great. But I didn't lose heart. I kept improving my craft and product quality. Gradually, customers came to appreciate my unique designs and high quality. As the orders grew, I rented a small workshop and hired a few workers. My small business started booming. At this time, Ken also graduated from military school successfully. He was like a rocket ignited, quickly rising through the ranks. With the solid knowledge he gained in school and his own efforts, he stood out in the military. Starting from the grassroots, he always led from the front on every mission, commanding decisively. The troops he led were disciplined and well-trained, scoring excellent results in various military drills and real missions, and his position climbed step by step. A few years later, I attended a military event and ran into Linda, who once caused quite the stir but now was like everyone else. She glanced at me and hurriedly walked away, unwilling to even make eye contact. It was from other military wives that I heard about what happened over the years. Turns out, Nolan injured his leg in an accident a few years ago and chose to leave the service with a disability pension. He was arranged a civilian job by the organization. However, Linda felt he wasn't a match for her and divorced him. After the divorce, Linda got involved with a recently widowed officer, and the two quickly began discussing marriage. During that time, she thought she'd found someone amazing to back her up, and acted all high and mighty in the performance troupe, bullying others. But then something happened, and the marriage was called off, with the middle-aged officer marrying someone else. Linda in the cultural troupe has become a sideline figure, and is no longer given important roles. Meanwhile, Nolan, who was discharged and took a civilian job, was dismissed shortly after due to a major dereliction of duty that caused significant economic losses. Nolan had always been a golden boy since childhood and never faced failure. These successive blows left him completely defeated, cutting off contact with former comrades and subordinates. The military wife telling the story was somewhat sympathetic, but I felt no pity. They brought it upon themselves, and honestly, I thought they deserved even more. Fast forward to the 21st century. After years of effort and struggle, my textile factory has grown larger. The products not only sell well locally but also abroad. With the advantage of information from my previous life, my assets have exceeded billions, making me a well-known entrepreneur in the domestic textile industry. Ken, though in his 60s, still stands tall with a determined look. He's aging like fine wine. His crisp military uniform, adorned with shiny epaulets, signals his high rank and authority. Yet, whenever he's with me, all his external authority turns into boundless tenderness. As time goes by, in the realm of our marriage, we understand and support each other. Whether through stormy times or sunny days, we stand by each other, sharing everything life throws at us. With Ken by my side, a sensible daughter, and a cute grandchild, I seem to have not thought of Nolan for decades. Until one day, Ken and I were driving our granddaughter to the park. An old man with a limp came shakily out of the security booth, holding a QR code for us to scan to pay. The moment our eyes met, Nolan and I were both stunned. Ken had long forgotten about my past entanglement with Nolan, and could never have guessed that this dirty, down-and-out old man was once the confident leader. Unfazed, Ken scanned the code. The parking gate lifted, and the car slowly drove out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw Nolan still standing there, motionless, watching the direction our car was headed. Nolan, this time, it's really goodbye forever. The end.